The first time I read the rules, I laughed. 27 pages of bureaucratic nonsense, I thought. Rule number 1, never dive alone, even if your partner's equipment fails. Standard stuff. Rule 7, if you see lights that aren't from our team, turn off yours immediately, cease all movement, and remain in absolute silence for exactly 15 minutes. That's when I stopped laughing. I've been a government rescue diver for 8 years now. Started right out of the Coast Guard, figured it was just another way to serve. We pull bodies from wrecks, recover sensitive materials, sometimes hunt for survivors in impossible places. The pay's decent, the work matters, and most days I get to do what I love, explore the deep places where sunlight never reaches. My name's Marcus Chen, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought those rules were just paranoid government bullshit designed to keep us from stumbling into classified operations. Russian submarines, Chinese research vessels, that kind of thing. Cold War thinking in a modern world. I mean, Rule 15 literally says, if you encounter divers not from your unit, do not acknowledge them, do not approach them, and report their coordinates only after surfacing. Who talks like that? Turns out, people who know things, I didn't. The USS Meridian went down in international waters off the California coast on a Tuesday morning. Cargo ship, nothing fancy, but she was carrying some kind of scientific equipment bound for a research station in Alaska. The Coast Guard found her 3 days later, sitting pretty at 400 feet, her hull cracked like an egg, but mostly intact. Standard recovery operation, they said. Get down there, secure the cargo, check for survivors, even though we all knew better. My partner Jake Martinez had been doing this longer than me. 15 years of pulling things up from places they weren't meant to be. Good diver, steady hands, never panicked, even when things went sideways. We'd worked together for 3 years, and I trusted him with my life. Had to, really, when you're that far down and that far from help. You read the new addendum? Jake asked as we suited up on the Coast Guard cutter. The Pacific was unusually calm that morning, which should have been a good sign. What addendum? He handed me a single page, freshly printed. Came in this morning, specific to this dive. Rule 28. If you observe any non-standard diving equipment, including but not limited to lights that pulse in patterns, suits of unknown design, or propulsion systems not issued by this department, immediately ascend to 50 feet and wait for extraction. Rule 29. Under no circumstances should you attempt to communicate with or follow any divers who do not respond to standard hand signals. Rule 30. If you hear sounds underwater that resemble human voices but cannot identify the source, ignore them completely. Do not investigate. Do not respond. Jesus, I muttered. What kind of operation are we walking into? Jake just shrugged, but I caught something in his eyes. Not fear exactly, more like resignation. Like he'd seen these kinds of rules before. The Meridian was resting on a relatively flat section of the continental shelf, her bow pointed northwest toward the deeper water. As we descended, our lights cutting through the blue-black water, I could see she'd gone down fast. No attempt to level out, no emergency ballast blown, just straight down until she hit bottom. At 300 feet, Jake tapped my shoulder and pointed to his depth gauge, then held up his hands in the standard slow down signal. I checked my own gauge and saw we were descending faster than planned. Not dangerous, but not right either. I adjusted my buoyancy compensator and felt the descent slow. At 350 feet, I saw the first light. It wasn't one of ours. Jake and I both used standard LED arrays, bright white beams that cut through the darkness in clean, steady lines. This was different. softer, almost blue-green, and it seemed to pulse with a rhythm that reminded me of a heartbeat. It was maybe 100 yards off our port side, moving parallel to the ocean floor. I reached for my light switch, remembered Rule 7, and killed my beam, tapped Jake's shoulder and pointed. He looked, saw it, and immediately shut off his own light. We hung there in the darkness, 40 feet above a dead ship, watching that strange glow move through the water like a living thing. 15 minutes. The rules said 15 minutes of absolute silence. I counted heartbeats, tried to stay calm, tried not to think about how far we were from the surface and how small we were in all that black water. The blue-green light moved closer to the wreck, paused near the cargo hold, then continued on its way until it disappeared into the darkness. When our 15 minutes were up, Jake switched his light back on and gave me the OK signal. I responded in kind, but nothing felt okay. We continued our descent toward the meridian, but I kept glancing over my shoulder, looking for more lights that didn't belong. The wreck itself was standard stuff. Big hole in the port side where she'd struck something on the way down, cargo scattered across the seafloor, fish already making themselves at home in the twisted metal. We found the scientific equipment in what remained of the cargo hold. 3 large crates marked with symbols I didn't recognize, sealed tight and apparently undamaged. Jake was attaching lift bags to the first crate when I heard it. A sound that shouldn't exist, 400 feet underwater, in a dead ship, miles from any other human activity. Voices. Not the distorted radio chatter that sometimes bled through on our comm system, but actual human voices, clear as if someone was standing right next to me. "Marcus, can you hear me?" I spun around looking for the source. Jake was 20 feet away, focused on his work, his comm clearly switched to our private channel. The voice came again, closer this time. "Marcus, we need to talk." Rule 30 flashed through my mind. Ignore them completely. Do not investigate. Do not respond. But the voice knew my name. How could it know my name? I forced myself to focus on the crates, but the voices continued. Multiple speakers now, having a conversation I could only catch pieces of. Something about the schedule and territorial agreements and the old places. I tried to tune it out, but one phrase cut through everything else. They don't belong here. Jake finished with the first crate and moved to the second. I was about to join him when I saw another light, much closer this time, maybe 50 feet away, moving along the starboard side of the wreck. This one was brighter than the first, and as it moved, I could make out a shape behind it. A diver. Had to be a diver. But the silhouette was wrong somehow. The proportions didn't match any diving suit I'd ever seen. Too long in some places, too narrow in others. And the way it moved through the water, not the clumsy, careful movements of someone fighting buoyancy and current, but smooth, effortless, like it belonged there. I tapped Jake's shoulder, pointed toward the figure. He looked, saw it, and immediately began gathering his equipment. Time to go. But as we prepared to ascend, more lights appeared. First 1, then 3, then half a dozen, all around us, all attached to those same wrong-shaped figures. Jake grabbed my arm, pointed up. We needed to get to 50 feet, needed to call for extraction, needed to follow the rules that suddenly made perfect sense. But as we started our ascent, one of the figures moved to intercept us. Up close, I could see it clearly. It looked like a diving suit, but no suit I'd ever seen. The material seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. And where the helmet should be, there was something that might have been a face, but definitely wasn't human. Too many eyes, or maybe not enough. Features that seemed to rearrange themselves as I watched. It raised one arm, too long, too flexible, and made a gesture that looked almost like a greeting. Then it spoke, and its voice came through the water as clearly as if we were standing on dry land. You're in the old places, the deep places that belong to us. We had an agreement with your kind. The rules were meant to prevent this. I wanted to respond, wanted to ask what agreement, what rules, but Jake's hand on my arm kept me steady. Rule 29, do not attempt to communicate with divers who do not respond to standard hand signals. This thing was communicating just fine, but it sure as hell wasn't using hand signals. More of them appeared, surrounding us in a loose circle. They moved through the water like dolphins, graceful and purposeful, while Jake and I hung there like clumsy tourists in an alien landscape. One of them approached the meridian, examined the cargo hold where we'd been working, then returned to the group. "You've disturbed the feeding ground," it said. "Taken what was not meant for the surface. The ship is ours now. Everything that falls to us belongs to us." Jake was already ascending, pulling me with him, but the creatures followed, maintaining their circle, herding us upward like underwater shepherds. At 200 feet, they stopped, hovering in formation while we continued toward the surface. The last thing I heard before we broke their influence was that same voice, calm and final. "Tell your surface dwellers the agreement still holds. The deep places are ours. Respect the boundaries, follow the rules, and there will be no war." We surfaced 20 minutes later, our emergency ascent protocols triggered, our dive computers screaming warnings about decompression. The Coast Guard medic checked us over while we sat in the decompression chamber, but we were fine physically. Mentally was another story. "What the hell were those things?" I asked Jake once we were alone. He was quiet for a long time, staring out at the water. Finally, "I've seen them before, 3 times in 15 years, always in the deep places, always around wrecks. Command calls them territorial disputes with unidentified foreign assets. That's what goes in the reports." "But you know better? I know the rules exist for a reason. I know people who've ignored the rules don't come back. And I know that whatever agreement they're talking about, it's the only thing keeping us alive down there." The debriefing was classified, of course. 2 pages of questions about equipment malfunctions and navigation errors, and whether we'd seen any unauthorized personnel. I lied through my teeth, stuck to the story about faulty depth gauges and communication problems. Jake did the same. But 3 days later, a new set of rules appeared in our briefing materials. 47 pages this time, with detailed protocols for something called Deep Territorial Encounters. Rule 35 caught my attention. If contact is made with DTEs, acknowledge their claims to wreck sites, cargo, and feeding areas. Do not attempt to challenge or negotiate territorial boundaries. Feeding areas. I thought about the Meridian, sitting on the ocean floor with her cargo scattered like breadcrumbs. Thought about the voices talking about the old places and what belongs to us. The creatures hadn't been guarding the wreck from salvagers or foreign operatives. They were protecting their territory, their resources, their home.
We'd been diving in their backyard for decades, following rules designed to avoid a war with something that lived in the deep places long before humans ever dreamed of going there. The USS Meridian wasn't a recovery operation. It was a diplomatic incident.
And those rules, all 47 pages of bureaucratic paranoia, were the only peace treaty we had. I put in for a transfer the next week. Desk job, they said. Harbor patrol, shallow water stuff, nothing below 100 feet. Some people called it cowardice. I called it wisdom. Because I'd seen what lived in the deep places, and I'd heard them talk about the old agreements, and I knew that our little human presence in their world existed only because we followed rules we didn't understand. The ocean covers 70% of our planet, and we've explored less than 5% of it. We like to think we're the dominant species, the masters of Earth's resources. But down there, in the places where the sun never shines and the pressure would crush us like bugs, there are intelligences that knew this world long before we crawled out of the shallows. They have their territories. They have their rules, and they have the patience to wait for us to learn our place in the deeper order of things. The government knows this, has always known this. That's why the rules exist. That's why some operations never make it into the official records. That's why divers who see too much get transferred to harbor patrol. Because the alternative is a war we could never win, fought in a domain where they have every advantage. The rules aren't about avoiding foreign spies or protecting classified technology. They're about staying on the good side of creatures that could end our naval operations with a thought, that see our deepest wrecks as their neighborhood grocery stores. I still dream about that voice, calm and certain. Tell your surface dwellers the agreement still holds. What agreement? Who negotiated it? How long has it been in place? These are questions I'll never get answers to. Questions that exist above my clearance level, and probably above the clearance level of anyone who'd admit to knowing. But I know this. Every time a government diving team goes deep, every time they approach a wreck or a research site or a recovery operation, they carry those rules with them. 47 pages of instructions that boil down to a simple truth. We're visitors in their world, and we'd better act like it. The ocean remembers everything. The pressure, the cold, the darkness. They're not obstacles to overcome. They're reminders of how small we are, how far we are from home, how much we don't understand about the world beneath the waves. And sometimes, if you're very unlucky or very stupid, you get to meet the neighbors and learn just how precarious our position really is. I never went back to deep water diving. Never wanted to see those lights again, never wanted to hear those voices discussing territory and feeding grounds and the old agreements that keep the peace. Some knowledge is too heavy to carry, and some rules are too important to break, even when you don't understand why they exist. The deep places belong to them. They always have.
We just borrowed a little space at the edges, and we'd better be grateful they let us stay.